This chart is currently telling us that a big move is coming for Bitcoin. And this chart is giving us a good indication of which direction that move is going to be. So let's see what happens when there's growing activity and decreasing volatility. Today we're going to be looking at a few new look into Bitcoin charts to try and gain some insight onto where the next big move for Bitcoin is going to be. And to begin with, we're just on the active address growth trend chart, as we can see here. And this is a little similar to one of the existing charts we have on look into Bitcoin, which is just the active address chart. But this is actually taking a step further by implementing some moving averages so we can see the more macro trend basis of the activity on the Bitcoin network. And we can see that pretty immediately there is a bit of a parallel to the Bitcoin price action. Once we see these tend to increase, especially this blue one, which is the 365-day or yearly moving average of the active address growth trend. Once this is increasing quite rapidly, we usually see the Bitcoin price in parallel moving upwards alongside that. And again, once we see this start to decrease quite rapidly, Bitcoin's price also tends to decrease too. There's only really one recent example, which was the most recent all-time high in the double peak bull cycle we had, which was a little bit of a divergence there. But apart from that, this has been a great indicator. It just basically telling us how much new capital inflows we can expect coming into the cryptocurrency markets. And we can see, like we said, the parallel is very clear to see. But once we add on something like the 60-day or the 2-month moving average, I think we can get even clearer indications just because we can now use some confluence between the shorter term and longer term averages. And especially we can use this almost like a moving average crossover. Once we see this shorter line cross beneath this longer term active address average, it gives us a pretty good bearish indication that some downside price action is probably to be expected. Especially in the most recent few cycles, this is called the more drawn out period of a bear cycle, pretty much to perfection. And again, once we get a sustained break above this, it is aligned pretty much perfectly with a much more sustained move to the upside. And recently it looks like we're having a little bit of a choppy consolidationary period with these two moving averages as they've converged and crossed quite frequently. It looks somewhat similar to this period just in here in 2019, just prior to the big bull cycle we had, where we see price action of the shorter term 60-day moving average crossing above and beneath quite frequently this longer term 365-day moving average, as we're seeing here. But we've recently just seen quite a substantial break above this line, and we haven't actually seen any sudden reaction in price to actually match what we've historically seen with this indicator. Again, pretty similar to what we saw here, where just after the COVID 2020 dump, we saw this increase quite notably, but price didn't react immediately. It's almost like there's a little bit of a lag between price actually rallying following this active address growth trend spiking to the upside. But I think one thing we can also do is look at another metric, not just looking at the more macro growth of active addresses on the market, but if we also look at something like volatility, which again gives us a little bit of insight into when we can expect a big move. In Confluence, these may be able to give us a little bit more insight. So here again, one of the newer charts we have is the Bitcoin volatility chart. And if I just remove all but the longer one, the 1-year volatility, we can see this has been on a pretty general downtrend for a long time now, which is to be expected in a Bitcoin bear cycle, and especially the transitionary period between bear cycle and bull cycle. But if we add some more of the short-term volatility metrics, we can see that it's actually looking pretty comparable to some historical situations we've previously had, especially again if we look to pretty similar circumstances to when the active addresses was showing us very similar circumstances in the past. We can see here, looking at the 3-month volatility, this is actually a pretty crucial turning point historically for Bitcoin. It's only actually reached levels this low, especially in the past few years anyway, on 2 separate occasions, and that was just prior to the big dump we had in 2018. And just prior to the big pump we had from about $3,000 or $4,000 to about $14,000 in 2019. So a pretty key turning point, and it's a similar story for the 1 month as well. This is a little bit more frequent and choppy in its nature just because it's a much shorter moving average, but we can see again a pretty similar story as this is coming down to this turning point here. We usually are about to see a big move in the Bitcoin price action. So if we take into account of these metrics, the previous times we've had volatility this low, which was just as we had in the previous chart that we saw with the active address growth trend, this was just as we had a huge spike to the upside in the shorter term 60-day average of that trend compared to the 365-day. And the other 2 instances were just prior to the 6,000 to 3,000 2018 bear cycle drop, and then just prior to the 4,000-ish to 14,000 bull cycle run up, which again lines up almost perfectly with what we would expect due to the correlation we can see between the low volatility, active address growth trend, as well as the Bitcoin price. What we also need to factor in is the amount of actual liquid Bitcoin supply that is available to be traded and invested by both retail and institutional clients. We can see here that especially over the past few years, the amount of Bitcoin that's just been available on the network for trading continues to decrease. We can see here just by looking at the hodl waves of 3 months and above that this continues to climb to the upside, where nearly 90% of Bitcoin hasn't moved in the last 3 months, which is higher than it has ever been. And this is true for pretty much all of these longer term metrics. If we remove this and just look at the 6 months and above, again, same story. The 1 year and above, again, same story. The amount of illiquid Bitcoin just continues to rapidly increase. So if you just take into account the fact that low volatility is currently occurring, indicating that a big move is probably imminent, the amount of addresses on the network continues to grow very rapidly, and the amount of actual Bitcoin available for those new addresses coming into the space to actually accumulate continues to shrink at a massively increasing rate. To me, those are all combinations for a pretty stark move, probably to the upside. Also, if you haven't already, please don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications to ensure you're receiving all of our content as soon as it's released. And make sure to check out all the resources we've discussed today, as well as the many more that are all available on lookintobitcoin.com, your #1 source for Bitcoin information. So just to summarize, Bitcoin volatility remains historically low, but is approaching major turning points that have always led to large and sustained movements in the Bitcoin price action. And looking at previous and comparable instances of decreasing volatility, we can also factor in network usage and address growth to increase our likelihood of correctly preparing for what's next. In other words, looking at these two indicators in confluence, we can have a fairly high degree of certainty in which direction the next big move is going to be. And with active addresses increasing on a macro basis, and like we saw with the 60-day crossing above that yearly average for active address trend growth, it seems a price increase is far more probable. But we do always need to prepare for all circumstances. Just because historically these instances have led to one outcome doesn't necessarily mean it's a certainty going forward. So prepare for every instance, prepare for all circumstances, manage your risk. But ultimately, looking at the probable outcomes, I think we can say that this one is probably going to be favorable over the next few weeks and months. If you like this video, then please visit lookintobitcoin.com, where you can also consider becoming a site subscriber to gain access to professional resolution charts, advanced macro and portfolio data tools, in-depth crypto industry reports, live and personalized indicator alerts, private TradingView scripts, and more, all for a fraction of the standard industry price. And let me know what your thoughts are on the current growing activity for the Bitcoin network alongside that decreasing volatility. How do you think the next few weeks and months are going to play out for Bitcoin and the crypto markets? Let me know in the comments down below and on social media. I look forward to reading and replying to all of them. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.